musical landscape to a literary figure that looms large.
That's right, there were some news stories in that selected as well. Yeah, sorry. Can I ask you something? Why do you think people are so curious about you?
Well, I try not to be aware of that. I don't know why. I think maybe... have we begun?
Foremost writers. Someone once described as a scandalous woman writing scandalous novels.
Her books were instantly banned in the country of Ireland. A reputation for being something of a playgirl of the Western world.
Ladies and gentlemen, Edna O'Brien.
Hello, in tonight's programme we go to Abu Dhabi with Edna O'Brien,
Successful novelist Miss O'Brien is full of frank and provocative ideas on the problems.
Ireland's top-selling lady
Which
novel.
personal vice gives you most satisfaction?
I think occasional adultery, like once a year. I was longing to go with you, but I wasn't brought by you.
If I'm referring to my mum and I say, oh, well, she's writing a book or something, and people go, well, what does she do? And I say, well, she's a writer. Then they always go, would we have heard of her? And so I say, well, it's Edna O'Brien. And they either go, oh, right, or they go, no.
You quite thrilled me, actually, by that. What was I was going to... There was a question lurking in the back of my mind.
Usually, they ask me the question, and then and I say yes. And then they look at me and they go, is he telling the truth?
I like this part of London, Chelsea. It's smaller, it's on a scale. You know, they're costly houses. I couldn't buy one, but they are costly houses. But it's shabby enough as well. And you see people older with walking frames and small shops. It has that terrible cliche, it has the remains of a village life. I know my neighbours across the road in number 1, and they come and have a little drink about every 4 or 5 weeks. I know a lovely neighbour next door to me who is quiet, very important. My mother had a great fear of landlords. Well, I have inherited not only the fear of it, but the actuality of it. I believe there are happy houses and unhappy houses. This is a very happy little house. It's not that I have not shed the odd tear in this house, but that's different. It's a little nest, and the world outside, when I want to meet it, I meet it. And when I want to avoid it, I avoid it. I don't love living in London. I feel lonely in London. I would perhaps feel lonely in Ireland, so let me say that also. I don't feel part of any literary scene, to tell you the truth. You see, literary scenes can be very overrated, to put it mildly. Joyce said it. He said, don't talk to me about literature. Talk to me about turnips.
They were driven a few miles north to where a group of young men were digging a long trench for the electricity cables to be put in later on. At first sight, it was hard not to imagine those young men, young though they were, destined for all eternity to be kept digging some never-ending grave.
I was given the inspiration by Sasha, who I suppose knows me better than anyone in the world. And Sasha said that he thought I would have both a curiosity and an empathy with these men who had come around the same time as I did, or a bit earlier, or a bit later, and lived in their own sort of ghettos. And they also had their exile in them.
I thought of the Shovel Kings, and their names suddenly materialized before me, as in a litany. Hawley, Murph, Moleskin McGavin, Turnip O'Mara, Whiskey Tip, Oranmore Joe, T-Boy Teddy, Accordion Bill, Rafferty, and countless others, gone to dust.
I have to say that since Sasha is an architect, I've taken slight more interest in buildings.
In buildings. Well, but the one thing I didn't want to do was be a writer. When my mum moved to Ovington Street, there were a great number of books. The books were all over the place, piled up on tables. So I said, well, if you're moving into this house, what you need is a library. And so we're going to design you a beautiful library. And obviously we had all the shelves made and the walls painted red and the floor painted red.
In commemoration of Anton Chekhov and Russia. I always hope and endeavour to work as soon as I get up. Once I go to my desk, I'm there. And if I'm lucky, I can start. I write in my little notebooks, well, this is stage 1, and then that is so illegible. That is like, as if it was written by an animal or something. Scrawl, scrawl, scrawl. I transfer that to the clean sheet of Marion Hotel paper. Well, for a time I used to, take a few pages, and eventually Bernie O'Mara, who was a wonderful woman there, she said, look, why don't we give you a bale of it? So I came home with the bale, and this is true, the Marion Hotel paper. I also have one from over in Connemara, Ballynahinch, but I didn't steal as much of that. I didn't get the chance, really. And that's very, very important. The paper, the pen, the silence. When I do sit down to write, I am very tense, very tense. It doesn't come lightly. And the steps into this grim...
An abiding memory of childhood is either her writing by hand and talking as she writes.
Steps to Parnassus had fallen away. No, had dropped away.
The verbal articulation and the transmission of material from the psyche out through the fingers and onto paper are all inextricably bound up.
Scarab, that's the word.
Then revision takes place, and she's a fiendish and obsessive reviser.
10,000 fathoms deep.
I remember lying in bed going to sleep when I was very small, and I could hear the of the typewriter and the ching, and it always was a very sort of comforting sound.
Yes. Also, I cooked a bit of dinner.
Oh, no, he did all that as well. Yes.
She wanted to go home. Not to London, to the pipes of light, but home to the race to which she belonged. And then she shivered uncontrollably, knowing that their thoughts were no longer hers. She had vanished back into childhood and the dark springs of her terrors.
I was born in a blue room in our house, which is Drewsborough House, and was equidistant between two small hamlets or villages. One was Toomgraney and the other was Scariff, County Clare. I thought of Drewsborough as being a bit of a mansion when I was growing up. They'd been to America, so it had some of those influences, the bay windows, a vestibule. No one else had a vestibule. Still not sure what a vestibule means. And, the tiled floors and stained glass. Oh, yes, it was grand. And it was also beautiful. In the house was my mother and father, my brother John, I think who saw himself as a bit of a toff, my sister Patsy, my sister Eileen, me. I think I always felt the ghost of a child that died before me, who was called Mary. I always felt she was somewhere in a wardrobe or something. Well, I was a bit loopy. But most Lovingly of all, there was our workman Torpy. And I loved Torpy. And I used to say at a very young age, I'm going to marry Torpy and we will live in the chicken run. I thought our dining room, which by the way, no plate ever was set down on the table there, I used to call it heaven. I was very fanciful and I would sit in that dining room. That was the happiest room because no one ever went into it much. Then across from it, there was what was called the vacant room. And my mother stored apples there, all along the curbs of the fire. And the room always smelled, that sort of cidery smell of, even when the apples were gone, of apple. Every room contains a story. Not all of them happy. Dialogue. I was with my agent Ed Victor one day, and the question was what to write next. I'd finished Saints and Sinners, and he said, "Why don't you write a memoir?" A memoir is a hard thing to do. We're loudly. No, actually, with triumph.
For Edna, it's all-consuming, really.
Give things a chance.
Oh, Edna will delete pages sometimes, and paragraphs, and I'll say, "No, what this?" And she said, "No, keep going," and she'll just, yeah, you're very sure what doesn't work, aren't you?
I think I'm probably very unsure that I have to work so hard to get it right. These are photographs, a bit of a collage that Faber, my publisher, put together as to see what would be an ideal photograph for my memoir on the cover. I never look the same in any single photograph, which must be an indication of a mental condition. This one of Mama and Dada, as I call them, my mother and father, and myself, I'm delighted to have found. We found it this morning. It is one of the few photographs I have of home.